Disney has been ruining Star Wars for the past 10 years now. With several lackluster films and TV shows due to overproduction, this meta they have created helps them keep a yearly subscriber count of around 164 million, earning them $7 billion in annual revenue, allowing them to fund more and more projects as a means of bombarding us with hours upon hours of content, easily making Disney one of the most powerful entertainment industries of all time. But it wasn't always this way. You see, before the dark times when LucasArts sold to Disney, Star Wars was mostly just movies. Movies that weren't marketed for a target audience, or dictated by corporate higher-ups who really knew nothing about the story. The first two trilogies were given a lot of creative freedom, which is why there is so much deleted footage and scrapped ideas. Back then it was more about passion, which was the same driving force that would allow George Lucas to create movies like The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, two movies from over 40 years ago that are still known as some of the best pieces of Star Wars cinematography to date. Sure, visually they might not stand up to the test of time, but that doesn't disprove the great stories that were told within them. I mean, even George Lucas himself didn't think viewers would enjoy A New Hope, but to his dismay they did. This led him to create the two greatest Star Wars movies. That in itself is just crazy. Yet what's equally as crazy to me is how George and his team managed to make such a great trilogy with a budget of roughly $73 million. This sounds like a lot of money until you compare it to the budget of just Episode 7 alone. So, I myself was a 2000s baby. I didn't grow up with the original trilogy, however what I did grow up with was the prequel trilogy, Clone Wars, games like LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, and The Force Unleashed. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, when I was younger Star Wars wasn't everything to me. It was more like a nice treat or break from some of the normal hero type movies I was accustomed to watching. Back then I was more of a Marvel fan, seeing as Spider-Man is still my favorite superhero to this day. Although that's not to say I didn't enjoy Star Wars, as I went through my fair share of lightsaber toys as a kid, but I consistently found myself returning back to the prequels, as I always held Revenge of the Sith in a secret place in my heart. This was due to it being one of the first movies to truly make me feel something other than just fun action. I mean, as a kid, Anakin's betrayal just hit different, because I didn't watch any of the original trilogy till I was a bit older, so I had no clue that Anakin would become Darth Vader, and I was instead forced to watch it in chronological order. Sadly though, this was peak Star Wars, as something unpredictable was about to happen. Around October 30th, 2012, LucasArts sells to Disney for $4 billion and around another billion in stock. Now, what we didn't know at the time was that Star Wars was about to drastically change. You see, as George Lucas gave the keys of his lifelong passion project away to Disney, he wrote up some fairly good ideas for what he believed should have happened in the third and final trilogy, all neatly tied up in one book, named The Star Wars Archives. In it, he envisioned that the events of Episode 7 would have been many years after the Return of the Jedi, where we would see Luke rebuilding the Jedi Order, but instead of Luke being the main focus, we would follow Leia as she would become the Supreme Chancellor of the New Republic. She would then fight against many new threats, as the power vacuum in the universe would need to be filled. Gangsters like the Hutts would quickly take advantage of this opportunity, hiring ex-Empire soldiers to work for them, creating small but powerful armies. Even greater is the addition of Darth Maul as the main villain, along with his new apprentice, Darth Talon. Both of them controlled a massive drug trade together, ultimately giving Luke a reason to come back one last time. Not only that, but in the end they would have revealed that Leia was actually the chosen one. Even just the idea of this sequel trilogy sounds 1,000 times better than what we got. It really just amazes me that George Lucas handed them an entire trilogy on a silver platter, but instead we got this. Now, I'll give about an ounce of credit to The Force Awakens, as it managed to tell a somewhat cohesive story with a bunch of new faces, but it was still really carried mostly by the performance of the original cast, along with the hype that they brought with it. I mean, to be fair, every single actor in these films did the best with what they were given, although they slowly became targets for hate. The rest of the trilogy only proceeds to build on the flaws of the previous movies, becoming more apparent on just how much Disney had their hands in the entire production. Now, pair this with the fact that the backbone of the movies were pretty much nostalgia, in a way making some of the original fans of the series feel they needed to come back to enjoy something so dear to their hearts all over again. Of course, people quickly began to realize that this was a sham, or more so a spit in the face of the love and passion that was put into the first 6 films, later inviting some fans to even theorize that this new trilogy wasn't even in the same universe as everything else. Imagine creating something so disingenuous to its predecessors that the fans themselves wish it was completely trashed. This of course wasn't the end of the backlash, as most projects moving forward would be looked at with immediate negativity simply due to Disney having any involvement. Although an exception can be made with the movies and shows like Rogue One, The Mandalorian, and Andor. However, most fans were skeptical if any of the three would be good, prompting some to not even watch at all, instead waiting to hear others' opinions before enjoying it themselves. But the true reason they enjoyed these shows was simply due to the fact that Disney didn't try to shape them into their vision, as they were more like side projects, allowing the show writers to pour every creative juice they had into each line and scene, quickly making unknown characters like Din Djarin, Cassian Andor, and Jyn Erso fan favorites. Disney's problems didn't just end with the movies and shows. You see, they cancelled several highly anticipated games that were already in production before LucasArts sold to them. This included the likes of Darth Maul's origin story and several others. Most of these games were pretty deep into their production, as they had the story mostly fleshed out, along with some gameplay as well. I mean, who wouldn't want to play a Darth Maul game based on his origin story? The guys at Red Fly Studios were tasked to make us, the player, feel the brokenness in Darth Maul's childhood, forcing us to watch him become the villain we all know and love, creating a bit of sympathy towards the character. Another game that was cancelled was Star Wars 1313, a game centered around the crime in the lower levels of Coruscant, at one point even playing as Boba Fett. Now this is a bit worse than the Darth Maul game because they were already finished with a big chunk of the game, being able to show it off at E3, later releasing a playable demo. So it really came as a shock to fans who enjoyed the gameplay when they heard that it was being completely shut down by Disney, only adding to the fiery flames of hate that the fans began feeling towards Disney. Now, as some of you may know, all of this isn't just a Star Wars problem. Marvel has had the same issue with most of its shows and some of the movies for the past couple of years, rushing production simply to mass produce sellable garbage, with a couple of gems hidden here and there. I personally thought this meta started with Marvel and would kinda just stay there, but it seems like Disney is just now realizing the true potential of Star Wars, so they've created a lineup of 6 shows and 8 games, with most of them being set to release within the next couple of years. Although I don't know what to think of them yet, I'm personally looking forward to the Ahsoka and the Skeleton Crew shows. However, after seeing what happened with Obi-Wan, I don't exactly have high hopes for either of them. And that sucks, because I've been more into Star Wars these past 2 years than ever before. I mean, Jedi Survivor already has my $70, and I personally can't wait for the new seasons of Andor and The Mandalorian, even though there's always this lingering feeling that Disney will interfere in the production of both of these series. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are some notably great projects that have been pushed through Disney's barge of trash, most recently being Andor Season 1. Even though it was more of a slow show, not pertaining any fast-paced lightsaber combat at all, I still think it's my second favorite show simply to how mature it is, showing just how evil the Empire truly was, while giving us a much deeper understanding of how it affected the galaxy as a whole. Of course, the same could also be said with Rogue One, seeing as they were both directed by the same person. Therefore, I kind of expected it to be one of the better things to come from Disney's Star Wars. Shows like The Mandalorian and Andor should be the norm of Star Wars. Who knows, maybe they have taken a hint for once. Maybe we will get exactly what we need from Ahsoka, or get an amazing journey from a Sith's perspective in The Acolyte. I guess only time will tell, but for Star Wars' sake, I truly hope they begin to listen to the amazing directors that they hire, because I really don't know how many times they have to let us down with lackluster shows that feel cheap and underdeveloped before people just stop believing in Star Wars.